So, good afternoon, or indeed good day, or indeed good morning, depending on where you are around the world. Welcome to this presentation this afternoon. My name is Mark Bailey. I'm the IT chairman at the Royal Theatre Society London, and I'm hosting this afternoon. This is a webinar for people that have used Zoom before. This is slightly different from a Zoom meeting, in as much as we who are presenting cannot see you and you clearly can't see each other. We also can't hear you. So as we go through the presentation, if you've got any questions that you wish to raise, please do so using the Q&A facility, which is you'll find is at the bottom of the Zoom screen. The controls at the bottom of the screen appear when you put your mouse pointer over the screen, or indeed if you press the Alt key on your keyboard. And you'll see that there's a box there that's labeled Q&A. Please type your question into there and we will answer them at the end of the presentation. This afternoon's presentation is on the subject of the Wilding Castles 1955 through 1970. And I'm delighted to welcome my colleague Mike Roberts, who's a Vice President of the Royal and indeed a Fellow of the Society, who's going to tell us all about these stamps. So Mike, over to you.
Thank you, Mark. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome. There are three people that I'd like to thank before I start this, because it's helped with not only with my collection of the castles, but also my understanding of what's happened. Those three people are Bill Barrell, who's the well-known dealer, who's helped me out on the collection side of it. Peter Shaw, who's been very, very helpful in the information which he sent to me and the time that I've saved in having to spend in London at the museum. And the third one is my old friend, Ed Kupka, who, was very, very helpful in terms of being able to recognize printings and recognizing various abnormalities with the printings, etc. So on that note, we'll proceed. These are I think, one of the last produced fantastic sets of real stamps in the UK anyway. Now, it's a story of three printers and three watermarks, or one could say two watermarks and no watermark. Now, the story started way back when King George VI died, 6th of February 1952. And whilst the authorities spent a lot of time sorting out the lower denominations of what became the Wilding definitives and produced those fairly early on, the high values, which had only just been replaced during King George VI's time, it took 3.5 years before the post office released the first items on the 1st of September 1955. So we have Waterlow and Son, who were the first of the printers, followed by De La Rue, and then Bradbury Wilkinson. On the watermark side, we started off with the St Edward Crown cipher, E2R, and we went on to the multiple crown, and then later in 1967, Bradbury's were producing the stamps with no watermark. So it's unfortunate, or perhaps fortunate if you like, all the different combinations, that the times when the new stamps were produced by new printers and the watermarks were altered, the dates didn't coincide. So in early 1953, the post office sent out invitations to 17 artists and printers with some basics about what they did, what they wanted and what they didn't want. So the invitation document included copies of the existing high values, which you can see on the left there, a sample of the new Tuttons Halfpenny Wilding definitive, and a portrait of the Queen by Dorothy Wilding. Now, the invitations were sent out on the 19th of February. The printers included those three that we've mentioned, and Harrison and Sons Limited. Bradbury Wilkinson at that stage actually declined to participate. And they got back 64 designs from 16 different parties. And amongst those parties was Michael Goman, a well-known designer. And those are three samples from his archive. Interestingly, the first artist design competition, there were formats were possible upright, envelope sized, and also square. So there's one of each there. And a few more of his ideas here, described as industry and fisheries, shipping and agriculture, and compass and mining, some of his ideas. Further development of the ideas for the 2 and 6 on the right-hand side. Now, in short, and there is a very long story, but in short, the first designs, despite the fact that there were 64 of them, it didn't meet with the approval of the design committee. And they basically faffed about with the concept altogether, and eventually came up with the idea that they wanted to have a new competition. So, and this is cutting a long story short, in July 53, they cut the number of artists down to 7 and 1 printer, that one printer being Waterloo, and they were asked to submit further designs. And then special instructions were given for different artists on particular values. So they had 2 of those artists doing each value, and then one of them by Waterloo and Sons was the pound. And they came up with some more ideas. Generally, what was emerging was that they were going to have, the designs were going to centre around the castles of the UK. So we've got some unused examples there of the pound design by Waterloo, a 2 and 6 unadopted design by Mary Adshead, Carnarvon Castle by Linton Lamb, who was the eventual designer of the concept, and an idea, an upright design of Edinburgh Castle designed by Reynolds Stone. So a bit about the designer, and it wasn't his total idea. He was responsible for what we call the concept, the layout. The idea that it should be castles was very much of a joint decision. Now, Linton Lamb, born in 1907, was an English artist, designer, lithographer. He was born in India, grew up in London, and was educated in Bath. And he went on to study art at the Central Art School. He designed decorations for the Orient Line ships and exhibited at the Festival of Britain in 1951, before famously designing the binding of the Coronation Bible. So as I said, it was his concept, we could call it that, of the enclosure of the castle in a frame with some foliage around it, and the Queen's portrait on the right-hand side. it was decided that 4 castles would represent the different nations, the 2 and 6 for Northern Ireland, the 5 shilling Carnarvon Castle for Wales, 10 shilling Edinburgh, Scotland, and the £1 of Windsor Castle for England. So designs proceeded as normal. And you can see there from 4 bromides taken during the design process and how eventually the design emerged. So for the 2 and 6, we've got the final design that moved down slightly, and more detail was given to the sea in the foreground, which you can see if you look between the 2. Then we've got the 5 shilling, where there wasn't very much difference. The foliage slightly different, but broadly similar. The 10 shilling, the image was brought down considerably from where it was originally in the design. And for the £1, only minor alterations were given to the round tower in the centre. Now, the next stage has proved to be a controversial subject. The original colours, which you can see there for the King George VI stamps, when we came to agree the colours for the castles, and they'd established that the 2 and 6 was going to represent Northern Ireland, those of you in the UK will know that that was going to present a political problem. You can't have Northern Ireland in green. So they had to change that, change to brown. The 5 bob and the 10 bob stayed as they were. And the £1, there had been interest expressed and intention expressed, actually, that the £1 value should be the same colour as the PUC £1 in the 1920s, which is the reason why that ended up as black. So we then moved to the final imperforate proof stage. These were signed off in August 1955. And they were mounted on watermarked paper, signified by the WM.P. In the left-hand corner of 3 of them, right-hand corner on the 5 bob. And the letters and codes in the other corner referred to the colour references of Waterloo and Son, who were the eventual printers. Those were signed off, and we then moved to the printing stage, and imprimatas were produced, literally let it be printed, not perforated at this stage. And these are pairs from the left-hand side of the sheet from my collection. So we've got the 2 and 6 and 2 5 bob, and then the 2 higher, the 10 shillings and the £1. Incidentally, I apologise to the international people who, when I talk about 5 bob and 10 bob, it's shillings in old parlance, I'm afraid. So apologies for that. Waterloo and Sons then produced presentation card. So the details were obviously the printers, Waterloo and Son, the watermark, this is important, the St Edward Crown E2R cipher. The paper was cream, although shades vary. Perforation as per the catalogue, 11 by 12. They're printed in 2 panes of 40, 4 by 10. So a bit about the characteristics of the printing, because these are important when one wants to distinguish the Waterloo printings from later printings. And I've shown there on the right-hand side the layout of the printed sheet to show the margin lines, which you can see in the corners, the small vertical horizontal lines in the center, the central cross, and the two locating dots for the perforation machine placement either side. Now, there was a little bit of controversy with the post office at the beginning because the paper was darker than they wanted, and that was as a result of the peat in the water used by the manufacturer, which was Ivy Mills of Dartmoor, and the post office told them to sort that out, which they did. Put a bit of whitener in it, but you'll still find, if you look through, that the shades vary between creamy white and something that's a bit darker. So there we have sample blocks showing the marks. The top section is a block of 8 from rows 1 and 2, where you can clearly see the corner margins, and between stamps 3 and 4 you can see the vertical line, and between rows 5 and 6 you can see the central cross, and either side the perforator's guides. Not many errors and varieties of any great excitement here. Probably the weak value tablet variety on the 10 shilling is the one that's perhaps featured mainly in the catalogue, the Stanley Gibbons catalogue. There's some minor re-entries above the diadem on the pound value, but not really very exciting, I don't think, but there we are. So then we go on to the first release by the post office. The 10 shilling and pound values were first to be released on the 1st of September 55, followed by the 2 and 6 and the 5 shilling on the 23rd. I've illustrated there some first day covers, and to add a bit of interest, these have got the initials AJS on, which is apparently Amanda Skinner, who did quite a lot of work on similar covers between 1937 and into the 60s. I'm indebted to Mark Bailey, who's supplied me with quite a lot of information on this, which is a separate subject on its own. But nevertheless, I've included those because they were a little bit more interesting than the more bland first day covers, which are around in the marketplace. So let's go on to usages of Waterloo now. As you would expect in commercial use, they were heavily used with airmails and heavily used with parcels. So here's a parcel piece, 1957, £17, 14 shillings. That would have gone to a Zone C destination, which is basically the Far East and Australasia. A lot of money in 1957, so would have been a substantial parcel, £7, 6 ounces. Some other examples, a registered express envelope which was adhered to a parcel. I think that probably went with some philatelic purchases from a Robbie Lowe auction in Bournemouth in 1956, but can't prove it. The addressee were stamp dealers in Germany. The piece on the right, another airmail parcel piece, £1, 10 shillings for 12 ounces. That's from the Royal Aeronautical Society in London, picked for interest really. And then unusually, unusual uses, in fact you call it a fiscal use. On the left-hand side, these high values were used as a way of accounting for the 1 shilling prescription charges that were introduced by the NHS, and individual doctors could get the money back, but they had to be stamped. So that's an example of the prescription stamps form. And on the right, of course, they were also used on national telegrams. I've included that because amusingly it says you have qualified for the regional final darts competition. Now, we've got 3 years into the contract, and it was decided that we'll have a new contract from the 1st of January 1958. Now, the stamps weren't produced until the 25th of April 58, but the new contract went to De La Rue. All the existing plates and rollers were transferred to the new company. The watermark was maintained as the St Edward's crown, the same perforation. Basically, it's all the same. The gutters were slightly narrower, but the new De La Rue printing have no interstamp markings at all. Before, the printer used a number of registration sheets for colour matching, and they, De La Rue overprinted these with a cancelled overprint in purple colour. These were all originally in the De La Rue archive, but I'm aware that they were placed on the market in 1990. So we're on to the De La Rue, the first printing. This is, from a philatelic point of view, the best printing in terms of rarity. The top and bottom rows, there are no margin lines or interstamp markings. And from the screen, you'll see that that's the case. And if you make a direct comparison with Waterloo, you'll see that there's a huge difference. The margin perforation guides are still there, although not quite in the same form, between rows 5 and 6. So there we've got some blocks of 8 from the top and bottom, and then likewise for the 10 shilling and pound. Few minor varieties, again, were weak and missing frames to the right of the Queen's head. I can't get massively enthusiastic about those, but there we are. And there's some usages. Now, these are really quite rare. They're very difficult to find. But I've tried to include some interesting and topical ones. So we've got an insured parcel piece there from February 59 to the USA. On the right is an airmail cover to Iran, which is a very rare destination for this sort of thing. That's 30th of December 58, and that was equivalent to for 14 and threepence for a 9.5 ounce parcel to a Zone A destination. Zone A was basically North Africa and the Middle East in broad terms. And then we've got an airmail cover to the USA, to another stamp dealer, and high value parcel tag, and another one to Puerto Rico rather than the US, which I've included because it was an interesting destination. These are all basically commercial usages. Now, the GPO policy changed on the use of the St Edward's crown, and that was in the light of the forthcoming regional stamp issue. Now, the original watermark, which was the E2R cipher, raised Scottish objections, and that was because she wasn't Queen Elizabeth II of Scotland, because the first Queen Elizabeth wasn't Queen in Scotland. So the cipher was replaced by the multiple crown. And the values there were released during June and July of 1959. But importantly, immediately before this, the post office wanted to be aware of the clerks knew which stock to use first. So the 2 and 6 value only was marked with a single dot under the left-hand stamp. The idea being that that would distinguish them from the later new printings, and they would use those first. Well, once they'd started to use the new stamps, the sheets of all the values carried 2 dots under the bottom left-hand stamp. Again, this was to distinguish them from the earlier printings with the old St Edward's Crown watermark, and to make sure that they used everything in the right order. Now, I did explain earlier on that there were 2 panes of 40, and through research which has been carried out mainly by, I think, by Peter Shaw, he established that there was a slight difference between where the dots were between the 2 panes. One is between 6 millimeters below the line, and others are a bit more than that. But that's a detail which I'm not going to go into right now, but that was why they were there. So De La Rue produced for the second printing presentation packs. They did this in 1960, and they produced 3 types: in sterling, in dollars, and without currency. And I think of all those 3, the one without currency is probably the rarest, and the one I showed you there is the commonest. Not that they're common at all, they're not, but relatively speaking. Now, on to a few errors which are known on the second printing of De La Rue. Now, this, I think is a spectacular error, really. And all the more spectacular because it's a big block. Basically, a simple misfeed of the paper, but if you put a black background behind it, I think it looks fantastic. Equally spectacular, we've got here a block showing a full printing offset on the reverse. This occurred on a misfeed of the pressure plate, and which by accident had picked up the ink design from the printing plate, and when the next sheet was fed in, the design was transferred onto the rear of the sheet. And again, that's just one of these things that looks wonderful, I think. A few more less spectacular ones. The 5 shilling this isn't listed. The left-hand flagstaff on the 5 shilling in the Carnarvon Castle is known with an extended left-hand, well, basically extension. And the 10 shilling is known with a plate scratch in the value tablet. Both of those you can see, I think, on that illustration. And then some usages. I picked the one at the left, aware that it's got a stain on it, but it's a very interesting usage because it's got this superscribed parcel label on it. It's basically an arrangement whereby you could put your parcel on a specific ship, either the Queen Elizabeth or the Queen Mary, send it to New York, and somebody would pick it up off the ship at the destination. 2 other ones, an unusual one, an unusual rate to the Somali Republic, and a more usual airmail to Nigeria on a registered cover. on bank business. Now, again, we're another 5 years on. So the Post Office decided they would have a new contract from the 1st of January 1963. And that was awarded to Bradbury Wilkinson. Again, all the master die, rollers and plates were transferred to the new company. But in this case, Bradbury's decided that from the master die and the rollers, they would make their own new plates. The item on the left-hand side is, I believe, one of only 2 surviving die proofs from that exercise of the pound value. Again, imprimaturs were prepared from the new Bradbury Wilkinson plates, and these went into the British Postal Museum. The ones I have there that are illustrated have got BPMA hand stamped on the back. So having created the new plates, the major difference now is that all the plates were numbered in the bottom right-hand corner. 1 for the left-hand pane and 1A for the right-hand pane. Those samples are all also signed by Linton Lamb, who is the original designer of the concept. So we have known now 9 plates for the 2 and 6, of which plate 4 was by far the rarest. We have 4 plates for the 5 shilling, 2 plates for the 10 shilling, and 1 plate for the pound. And you can see there the clearly numbered under the right-hand side. They also conducted an experiment on chalky paper. The idea was to produce a clearer, well-defined image, which is difficult to produce on this sort of presentation, although I think I hope it's made some kind of impact, but anyway, we're doubtful about it, but there we are. It's a difficult thing to scan. But when you see it in real life, it is a much clearer impression. So there's a sample there at the top, an imprimatur of the 2 and 6 on a chalky paper. Then they also carried out an experiment on the pound value. Those were never released by the Post Office, but a few found their way into private hands. And mine came by way of acquiring some of the items from the Jack Preston collection. Then a few Bradbury Wilkinson errors and varieties. Top left is the 5 shillings known printed on the gum side. Again, not an easy thing to represent on this sort of presentation, although I think it can be, you can see with a bit of imagination that probably is printed on the gum side, because it's browner and a little fuzzy. And then we've got examples of the confetti floors where the small items from punch holes have appeared in the press in unwanted places, and that's the result. Then we have paper folds and creases. Again, self-explanatory stuff. The one on the right is one of my favorites, because that's a beautiful paper fold through an entire, well, strip of 8. Then some usages. Parcel piece to New Zealand by Surface Mail. And one of my personal favourites, that's actually a very big envelope. But it's the fact that it's going to the New Hebrides in the Pacific that makes it special as far as I'm concerned. So that's a rate of 10 and 9p for 3 ounces. Now, from December 1967, when security had become less of a sensitive subject, Bradbury Wilkinson started using unwatermarked paper. So we've got there a set of imprimatas again with BPMA hand stamps on the reverse. Despite that, the pound value is actually perforated, the other three aren't. And another 4 plates were used for the 2 and 6, 3 plates for the 5 shilling, 2 for the 10 shilling, and 1 for the pound. Those are all on unwatermarked paper, no other differences. Now, the GPO had a number of training schools, and these training schools used, obviously, the stamps, but they had different ways of showing that they were school specimens and couldn't be used in the post. And those are 3 different sets of examples from 3 different training schools. Now, somebody might say, well, which training schools? And I can't answer that. It may be an interesting thing to look at in the future. Usages. There's a form of mailed redirection because the fee needed in May 1969 was 10 shillings. The offering on the right-hand side is one of the most spectacular usages I have. £26 paid for a large parcel of £20. Now, that went by airmail, and it was obviously some kind of precision instrument, judging from the label on it. Just a wonderful thing. But you're surprised what you can find on eBay these days. And just to finish, there was a celebration in 2005 by a miniature sheet of the Castle issue, which it just needed to be stated. It was the 50th anniversary, and the sample miniature sheet is on the left-hand side. But how many of you realise that despite the fact that the 2 and 6, 5 shilling and 10 shilling were all invalidated when it came to 1971 decimalisation, the pound value still remains valid. And that is a cover to Hong Kong that was dated only 2 years ago. And there we have £9.25 with £2.25 paid in cash and £7 in £1 Castle stamps. So there we are. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Mike. If you'd like to stop sharing your screen. Ladies and gentlemen, as Mike has put there, we're now going to move to Q&A. Thank you for people who've already raised some questions. So, Mike, we'll start with those. Our member Philip Varley, who lives over in Colorado, would like to know, are there any reference books on the subject?
Well, there are several different, I say, not a specific reference book just on one matter, but the Queen Elizabeth Waterloo Castle High Values is the subject of a book in January 1990. It's a study paper by Gerald Bater and the Lord Spence, but that refers to just the Waterloo castles. We have a number of series of articles which was written by R.F. Allen in Stamp Collecting in 1979. We have a number of articles written by Peter Shaw, who I've already referred to, in Gibbons Stamp Monthly in August 2008 and July and August 2009. And there are 2 references in the British Philatelic Bulletin, one of several years ago and one that I personally did last year. I'm happy to share those details if you would like to email me.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for that. Other questions that are related are coming in now. Robert Brown would like to know, why were the contracts reassigned?
Well, it was a policy to have new contracts every 5 years. So it took an awful long time to actually get stamps out of them to start with. So 1955 September was quite late, but they started work well before that. So the first contract was change of contract was 58, and then the next one was 63. So it was every 5 years.
Okay, thank you. Philip Varley asks a related question, I guess, with regard to references and so on. He asks, has this been an exhibit somewhere?
I have exhibited this at Stampex in January 2019. And I hope if we go ahead, you'll see it again in London 2022.
Something to look forward to. I think we're all looking forward to London 2022. Somebody's asking, how have you identified the printings of stamps on covers where you presumably can't see the watermarks?
Well, you can always take the stamps off and have a look, but I haven't done that. You can have a pretty good idea that you can cut it down straight away as to whether it's the problem in practical terms is usually between whether something is a Waterloo printing or a First Delarue printing, because most of the others are pretty obvious. So the first thing you look at is the date. Then you have a look at your reference collection to see whether the stamp and the colour is fits. And then you go and ask 2 other people who know a lot more about it than you do. And they say, oh, yes, well, I agree with that. That's First Delarue.
Okay.
I don't think, whilst you can't say you put your house on it, but I've got a pretty good idea now. I mean, Edward Klemke gave me an awful lot of little clues as to what you look for. But the main ones are pretty obvious. But normally, of course, you don't take the stamp off. But in extreme circumstances, I know some people do if they're in doubt.
All right, thank you. We're now getting some quite technical questions about watermarks.
I'm starting to worry about that, then.
Yeah, and what I would say, just as a general remark, ladies and gentlemen, is if we don't have time to tackle the questions now during this webinar, Mike will be delighted to chat with you at the Royal booth, booth B2, and he'll be able to answer questions, in through the text in the chat there. So we have, Philip Varley would just like to know, will this presentation be archived on the Royal website? I can answer that one. Yes, Philip, a recording of this presentation will be eventually made available kindly by the PTS, and we will therefore have that on the Royal's website. So that's that question. Stuart Chandler, who I understand is a dealer, Empire Philatelics. I think Stuart would like to know, do you know how many watermark inverted on the 5-shilling Bradbury printing are known to exist?
Just off the cuff, no. But we're talking about, I think, less than 12. And I do have it somewhere in my reference notes. When I happy to look that up. But more than that, I don't think I can say, really. I mean, inverted watermarks are something that I chose not to try. Well, you can't illustrate them in a talk like this, can you?
No, sure.
And they are all very rare. particularly so the 10 shilling, where we started off in Gibbons' catalogue by saying that there was 4 of them. Well, we found a 5th in the last 2 years. But interestingly, they've got a characteristic that they're all known from the same post office within 3 days. So that's fairly good evidence to show that there's consistency and they're correct. I'd like to be able to answer you specifically about the 5 shilling, but I'd have to go and look at my notes to do that.
Yeah. Anyway, Stuart, thank you, Stuart, for acknowledging that you're grateful for that reply. Thank you. Frank Walton, who, as you mentioned, knows quite a bit about the low value definitives. Yeah, the
Oh, really?
Yeah. Frank is reminding us that in the early 1960s, the Thrupney Wilding appeared with an experimental T watermark on multiple crowns paper. He asks, does that exist on the castles?
I've never seen one.
All right.
That's safer, because if I say that and somebody says, oh, I found one,
that'd be brilliant, wouldn't it? That'd be wonderful.
We've broken new ground, but I'm not aware that it does exist, no.
Right.
It's very scary to be asked a question like that by Frank Walton, I have to say.
Okay. Eric Mulder would like to know, how can we differentiate between the first issues and the De La Rue items printed on E2R watermark paper when there are no corner pieces?
Well, if you've got a block of De La Rue first printings and a block of Waterloo's, mint block I'm talking about, and they've already cut off the corner margins, the watermarks are the same, and because of where they are in the block, there's no inter-stamp markings anyway. The only way you're going to do that is by getting a micrometer out, looking at the gaps, vertical gaps between the stamps, and you'll find over a sample of several, there is a slight difference, narrowing between the De La Rue printing and the Waterloo printing, as I think I illustrated in one of the slides, actually. But again, I'm happy to answer that as a detailed question and send the person a sample to show what I mean.
Hey, thank you. On the subject of quite technical questions, we've got Mr. Chris Harmon asking the following.
That's even scarier.
That is even scarier. And Chris, it's a really good question that you've raised. How can the De La Rue printings have different spacing and marginal markings if they were printed from the Waterloo plates?
That's a stumper, isn't it? I could say, well, I've often wondered that myself. I don't have a definitive answer for, I'm sorry, I don't know.
Okay. Well, sounds like, Chris, there may be some investigation needed there. It sounds like an area of research. With an eye on the time, I'm going to finish just with one last question. And I'm not quite sure what your question means, Frank. Frank is asking about paper shrinkage after printing, question mark. Anyway, there's a whole bunch of comments coming in now, but I would like to just finish with one question about your presentation, because earlier today there was a presentation about doing presentations. The question is, what typeface do you use in your main text presentation and your titles? Also, is your background a textured background? The person raising this question does say that they like the combination very much. So would you mind just revealing to us what typeface you used for your main text presentation and your titles, and whether that background is a textured background?
Well, you know, I can't answer that, not because I won't, but I use Keynote, which is an Apple product, and then I have to convert it to PowerPoint for everybody else's benefit. Now, I use this particular presentation came off a sample and I chose it because it just fitted the bill to me. I thought that's going to work with the colors that I'm working with. Now, all those come with pre-decided fonts and spacings, which I haven't interfered with. So again, I can go back into it and look. But I mean, normally I use Calibri as a font, but that's not the case with this. It's something I've never heard of. But as I said, it came off a sample in Keynote. So that's the best I can do. I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Good. By the way, Chris Harmon apologizes for his question. He said sorry, but seriously, thank you very much. But thank you all of you for your questions. They really are appreciated. And Mike, thank you very much. I'd now like to hand over to Richard Stock, who I think
I'm unmuted.
wishes to say some words. Richard, over to you.
Thank you very much indeed, Mark. Michael, I've been absolutely intrigued by your presentation this afternoon. It's absolutely first rate. I've got an interest in this subject ever since I was quite young, and I haven't had the chance or the resources available to delve into it in the depth that you have, but you've covered absolutely every aspect of it in depth. As I said, it's fascinating. The usages I felt were incredible. The high value, and not only that, the destination in some instances. And you finished with that very high value usage many years after the pound stamp ceased to be in circulation. Dye-proof material is incredibly rare from this set. People regard it, I think, with very high regard simply because it's recess printed, and I picked up the comment that you made right at the start that it's one of the few remaining that's worth collecting because of the quality of the engraving and the production. The fact that it went through 2 watermarks and 3 printers adds tremendous interest to the ability to research the thing and present it in the way that you have. I've thoroughly enjoyed it. And I think that the other 124 people who attended this presentation are equally glad that they joined it and have appreciated it in the same way. Thank you very much indeed for a fascinating and intriguing afternoon with boundless rarities there. It's been wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Richard.
Yes, thank you, Richard. And indeed, thank you, Mike. Ladies and gentlemen,